Yeah, I don't know why. I've been doing this, for 4 years here, and I think this is the first time I've shown a clip from this movie, and I don't know why because it's just an amazing film. It's called The Bucket List, and it has obviously Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson, I think 2007 is when it came out. The story is two guys. They're strangers to each other. They meet in a hospital room where they are roommates. But they don't just share the hospital room, they also share a cancer diagnosis. They're terminally ill, and they have just a few months to live. And, they're very different kinds of people, and each of them has everything that they need, or maybe could ever want. Edward, the Jack Nicholson character, he is a corporate billionaire. And so what he has is money, possessions, things, billions of dollars. Money, as he says, is not an issue, and it funds a rather lavish lifestyle. So he has nothing to need, but neither does Carter, the character played by Morgan Freeman. Carter doesn't have a lot of wealth. He's a mechanic by trade, but he has other kinds of wealth, other kinds of riches, the kinds that aren't necessarily seen by everyone. And so both of them really have everything they could ever want, everything they could ever need. And yet, here's Carter making a bucket list. And there's Edward spicing it up. And it's everything from soup to nuts on that list. It's silly things, it's frivolous things, it's shallow things, it's deep things. Edward is thinking specific things like sit on top of one of the pyramids of Egypt. And as you heard, Carter is thinking more esoteric kinds of things, general kinds of things, like seeing something magnificent. Each of them knows that there's something missing, even though they have everything. And each of them has an idea of what it might be that they can do between here and the end of their lives that will make things complete. And that's what the list is all about. So let me ask you, do you guys have a list? I do. And what does it look like? I'm going to guess it's going to look a lot like our two friends in the hospital room. I'm going to guess it's going to be everything from soup to nuts. Some things are going to be frivolous. Some things are going to be shallow. Some things are going to be deep. I know I have places that I'd like to see, places I'd like to go that I've never been to before that might be important to me. Maybe some of you have folks that you'd like to make amends with. Maybe there's something else. Maybe you'd like to live long enough to see your grandchildren graduate from college and maybe even get married. The list goes on, right? But and by the way, we're a lot like them as well. We have all that we could ever want, all that we could ever need, and yet, just like Carter, just like Edward, we all have our list. I'd like to stop there, and we'll sing for a minute. So our lesson for today, and by the way, thank you, Trish, for reading, and also thank you, Kathy, for playing today. We really appreciate it. Let's show our, praise God for the music as well. So the lesson we just heard today, it's a wonderful lesson because there's just so much in it. And I mean, I didn't know quite which way to turn. I ended up in a direction, but I just want to mention that there's some things in there that are really important. So, for instance, there's this whole theme of invitation, right? So just before this lesson, Jesus meets up with two of John the Baptist's disciples. And Jesus said, "What are you looking for?" And the disciples said, we want to know where you're staying. And Jesus says, "Come and see." And so they come and see, and then they end up following Jesus. And then in this lesson, we have Philip, first of all. And Jesus doesn't ask him any questions. He just invites him. "Follow me." Philip follows him. And then there's this conversation between Philip and Nathanael that's going on. And Philip says, I've met the Messiah. And Nathanael says, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, he's from Nazareth." He says, "What could come out of Nazareth?" And Philip says, "Come and see." Right? There it is. And so there's this whole thing of invitation, and I want to get to it someday because it's really, it's an important theme, especially in terms of what we do here as a church and the way we reach out to others. But I'm going to save that one for another day because there's something else going on, something, quite frankly, that I didn't really understand until just recently. So Jesus has this conversation with Nathanael, and he tells Nathanael he saw him sitting under the fig tree. Right? And for whatever reason, Nathanael, at finding this out, that Jesus saw him sitting underneath the fig tree, Nathanael says, not only says, "You are my rabbi," but he said, "My teacher," but he also said, "You are the Messiah, the King, the one we've been waiting for." And I always found that odd because how does this get to that? How does Jesus just simply saying, "Well, I saw you sitting under the fig tree," how does that get over to Nathanael making this broad and brilliant confession about who Jesus is and what he's doing? Right? Well, I think it has something to do with what's not in the lesson, and that is that there's something going on with Nathanael. There's a reason why he's sitting under the fig tree. And what Jesus sees is not just Nathanael sitting under the tree, but he's seeing why he's there. He's seeing Nathanael's heart. He's seeing what's going on, and maybe it's things that are on his mind, or maybe it's something that's troubling him. And so when he says, "I saw you sitting under the fig tree," it's like Nathanael's life is exposed. Right? Jesus sees something that no one else knows except Nathanael himself, and now Jesus. And that brings him to that confession. What is it? Well, we don't know because it's not in the lesson, but some have suggested that maybe Nathanael is in some kind of trouble, that he's crashed and burned and is now in this complete and utter distress. So if you've followed the series The Chosen, that's the direction they take. So what they do is they make up the story this backstory that Nathanael is an architect, and he wants to praise God by constructing and designing synagogues that are beautiful for the God the Father. And what happens along the way is one of his projects collapses and people get killed, and all of a sudden this promising career and this life of serving God in this way has just turned to rubble, just like his project. And so he goes under the fig tree and he sits in despair. Right? And that could well be what's happened. Like I said, we don't know for sure. It's not told. John doesn't tell us in his gospel. But I'd like to offer up another suggestion. And the clue for me was the tree under which he's sitting. It's not an oak tree. It's not an elm tree. It's not an ash tree. It's not an olive tree. It's a fig tree. Okay? That doesn't mean much to you and me, but it meant something to Nathanael because in the Old Testament, that fig tree had a special significance. And it comes from, among other places, Micah 4:4. Would you please put this up? And let's read it together. They shall sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. Got that? Basically what that means is this is God making promises through the prophet Micah, he's making this promise that when you get to the fig tree and you're sitting underneath that fig tree, you have arrived. Okay, you have your two-story house. You have your white picket fence. You have your Oldsmobile country estate wagon and station wagon. You have your 2.3 kids, and you have your dog. You've arrived. You've come to it. You have everything you could ever want, everything you could ever need. And so Nathaniel, sitting under the fig tree, is sitting there in a place where things are content and things are good. The world has square corners. Very different than the other explanation, right? And so I'm also guessing, though, that if he has everything he wants and needs, he probably has a bucket list like us, right? Good chance of it. And so we don't know what that is, but it probably has something to do with the fact I have all of this. I've arrived. My life is in a good place. I could live here for the rest of my life and be perfectly content. God has smiled on me. God has blessed me. All of those things. So why am I writing a list? I'm guessing that, like us, all those things that we have, all of those ways that we look at our lives and we're satisfied with our lives, and yet there's still a hole. And none of that stuff and all the other stuff that we could possibly put in it will never fill the hole. Something missing. Something important. Something that would complete us in ways that we long for. We long to be completed. And we do it the way everyone else does it. We have our own fig tree. We sit under it. We've arrived. We've come. There it is. Everything's all good. And yet we're still restless. We're still looking for something that when we get to the end of our lives, we can look back and say, yeah, that was worth it. I've lived my life well. I've done what I need to do. There has been a sense of purpose. There has been a sense of direction. And all of this stuff is great, but it doesn't fill that little hole right over here that we keep trying to fill. And Jesus sees him sitting under the fig tree of his contentment. And Jesus knows about the little hole. And when he tells Nathaniel this, Nathaniel is all in. Because that's what he was doing, sitting in his world of contentment. He's wondering, why am I making a list? Why am I not quite there? Let's watch. So, following Jesus. What does that mean? Following Jesus means that you're following in the footsteps of someone who gives his life for the sake of others. And you're following in that. Following Jesus means that you love others more than you love yourself. Following Jesus means that you give up what's important because it's no longer important. And the things that really matter are the connections that you make with other people and the way you help other people and the way you change their lives for the good. Following Jesus completely turns the bucket list upside down and inside out. I know for Edward, if you watch the end of the movie, and you should watch the whole movie, Edward doesn't care anymore about sitting on pyramids or what's the other thing? Getting a tattoo. Care less. But kissing the most beautiful girl in the world, he has to swallow his pride to do it. He goes to the house of his daughter from whom he's been estranged for over a decade. And he makes amends. And then out from the other room comes the granddaughter that he's never met. And he bends down and he gives her a hug. And he kisses her on the cheek. He didn't see that coming. He was going for volume. Yeah, it changes everything. What you thought was important, it's nothing now. What you thought you should hold on to as being a matter of conscience or a matter of principle or whatever it happened to be, doesn't matter. Because there are people to love. There are people to care for. There are people to forgive. And there are people that you need to turn to because you've been separated. So let me ask you, what's on your bucket list? How does Jesus, seeing you sitting under your fig tree, how does knowing that and following him change the way you live your life? Amen.